All right, here we are for another NPSP talk. This is talk number 3. We're going to talk about money. So in talk number 1, we talked about how we model people and their households. In talk number 2, we discussed how we model organizations. Now, people are related to each other, and we mentioned that in talk number 1. That's a relationship. And people are related to organizations. We talked about that in talk number 2, and that's an affiliation. Now we're going to talk about money. In the nonprofit world, this comes in several forms. We call them donations, or we call them grants. So let's just kind of jump into that. In the commercial world, we call these sales. We're selling products, and in Salesforce, it's called an opportunity, and it's a standard object, and opportunities have a close date, they have a creation date, they have a status, they have an amount, they have a sales person or perhaps a sales team. They have a customer account and quite possibly a customer set of contacts that have some sort of role in this opportunity. And we bring all of that over into the nonprofit world, depending on how complicated things are. So let's just talk about, I think every nonprofit probably has 3 different kinds of money. And let's talk about those. All right, so I'm going to switch over to notes. Usually we rename the opportunity to donation. So you're likely to find in a nonprofit a tab called donation rather than opportunity. And almost everything is probably successfully renamed donation, but you may see the word opportunity from time to time because it's hard-coded somewhere. Now, just like in commercial Salesforce, the opportunity is always attached to the account, whether that's household account or organizational account, doesn't really matter. It's going to be attached to the account. And it has all the things that an opportunity has in Salesforce, and they mostly make sense. The create date is when you first found out they were going to give money to you. And the close date is going to be something like when they gave you the money or when they committed to giving you the money. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Oh, maybe we need to talk about it right now. Depending on there's a whole bunch of decisions that have to be made about money that are going to be not set by the admin. They're going to be set by what we call the governance body, or the governance, governance body, whether that is a committee or whether that is one person or whether it's the finance department or the legal department or the board or the executive director. Someone is actually going to make the governance decisions when it comes to finance. And one of those decisions is, what do we call the close date? In my organization, it's when we get the money. But in some organizations, it's when we have a firm commitment to receive money. And you're not really in charge of that, and you'll have to go with that, whatever it is. You also will inherit from commercial Salesforce an amount, and usually that's the amount of money you receive. But again, it can be a little different. The governance body is going to decide whether that's the amount of money you receive or whether that's the amount of money they think they gave. And for a cash donation or a check, that's exactly the same. But for example, for a credit card donation, it might be different by as much as by an average of 3%, because the credit card company is going to either charge your organization a fee or in some cases keep 3% of it, and you'll just never see it. For PayPal, it's 2.75% for nonprofits. You'll never even see the rest of that. And for some organizations that raise money online on your behalf, it can be 8%, it could be 6%. So there's going to be a governance committee that decides what to do. My advice as admin is to do what's going to, of course, what your governance committee wants. However, you're going to be talking to your donors about the amount that you record as the close date. And so my opinion is it should be the amount they think they gave. Likewise, in my opinion, you should advocate that the close date is the date the donor believes they gave the money, the date they put on the check, the date they clicked the button online. There can be a big difference between the date they clicked and the date you get the money. The date many people have clicked that I don't even know about yet, and I'll find out in the next 3 days or next 7 days, or in the case of Facebook, in the next 2 weeks. In the case of eBay giving or PayPal giving, it's going to be 30 days that I find out. In the case of some giving portals that are representing us, and you don't even necessarily sign up for these as a nonprofit. They're organizations that just make money for collecting money for you, and they take their percentage of it and they send it to you. It might even be 60 days before you see that money. There are employer match programs where people give through United Way or other employer workplace places. We don't even know they're doing it for a quarter. So, but in my opinion, you should strive to make the amount and the close date match what the donor thinks, because you're going to communicate to them about that. And it's very confusing and, in fact, disheartening to a donor who gave on February 14th $100 in honor of their sweetheart to find out that you got $96 in April. They don't need to know that about your organization. And so I would encourage you to encourage your governance to make decisions that are donor-centric in this way. So, so that's kind of what an opportunity looks like. Close date, a status, and for money that you just received, perhaps there are only two statuses: received and canceled. And why would you have a canceled? Because some checks bounce. Some PayPals are terminated. It was a mistake, and have to be refunded. And so you may want, completed or posted. Posted is typically a word people use all the time. It's posted or it's canceled. And those are probably the only two status values you need for money that just comes in. You may or may not have worked real hard for that money. The donor chose to give it to you and it came, and you are representing in Salesforce and it's posted or it's gone, canceled. And so that's kind of how you handle a lot of that money. And we'll talk more about how you might represent the payment later on, but that's how the opportunity is represented. It's attached to an account. It has a close date. And you also could be working with the created date. That sort of gives you some idea when your organization became aware of it. And it has an amount, and it has a status. Now, we already know that it's attached to the account. Well, what if we want to attach it to people? Well, Salesforce has a way of doing that, and it's called the Opportunity Contact Role, OCR. And in a household, the NPSP is going to have a setting that allows you to automatically add everyone in the household as an opportunity contact role. One person, however, is going to need to be designated as the primary contact for a donation. And they will typically be listed as the donor in the opportunity contact role. And everyone else who's part of the household on the day the opportunity is created, actually, will be named as a household member, unless you turn that feature off. And then you can add other people manually. And there are even some automatic ways now to add them. Why would you add other people? Well, perhaps you have a board member who has agreed to collect $25,000 in donations from people they know. You may wish to add that board member as a fundraiser to the donations that they receive, so that you can add up and track that they have done $27,000, or perhaps that they still have $5,000 to do this year. And there are actually some ways of creating those automatically now, based on relationships. You can add a relationship between your donor and the people they know, and mark that relationship in such a way that it will automatically add them as a fundraiser on opportunities that close to their friends. That's pretty cool. Likewise, there are ways to add opportunity contact roles to organizations automatically, such as, say, there's a board member who has a requirement to fundraise, and they recruit from a business that is run by a friend of theirs. You can create a relationship such that they will automatically get credit. They will automatically be added as a role to that business when they make an opportunity. Or perhaps the business owner is somebody you want to credit, even though it's going to the business. You know the business owner, and you want to make sure that they're included as an opportunity contact role. There's ways to encode the affiliation to that business such that when they have an opportunity that closes, they will be added as an opportunity contact role. Okay, now we'll talk more about what happens to those opportunity contact roles in another video, but right now we're talking about how we model an opportunity. So that's kind of what's going on. Now, NPSP adds some fields that you're going to need. Typically, when we receive a donation, we're going to send out a receipt, and often we're going to send out some type of thank you, depending on from the organization, depending on how big the donation is and where you are in the donation life, in the donor life cycle with that person. And NPSP has some fields to record whether you want to send a thank you letter and whether you have. And there are even some tools for automating sending that to the primary contact's email. NPSP does not provide a good way of printing receipts, and for that you're going to need some sort of document merge tool. Apsona is my favorite, but there are others. Let's see. There are also situations where well, we're talking right now about donations that just come in, and that's kind of the first type, simplest type of money. It just shows up. Maybe you worked hard for it, or maybe it's a follow-on donation that maybe you didn't work so hard for, or maybe it's a spontaneous gift because of some campaign you're doing or some social media or whatever. That brings us to the next stage. Just like in Salesforce commercial, you can associate an opportunity or a donation to a campaign. And I think a lot of people believe it is a best practice to associate every donation with a campaign. But unfortunately, it is often difficult to know why the donor gave. So in order to meet that best practice, a lot of organizations, I'm going to call it cheat. They have a new donor campaign, and they have an ongoing or recurring donor campaign, and then they have a catch-all campaign for like this year, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm just not sure it's really worth it. If you have identified campaigns, you will definitely want to attach donations to that campaign so that you can tell how effective they were, particularly if you have costs associated with them, so that you can figure out your return on investment. I admit I do not attach every donation to a campaign, so I don't live into that best practice. I have other ways of determining how effective we are at retaining donors and how effective we are at attracting new donors and so on. So, but if you wish to attach a donation to a campaign, you certainly can. And it can even be done automatically if you desire it. There are ways that NPSP can do that. You can attach tasks to a donation. Say a donation, perhaps it's the first time some account has ever donated. You may wish to attach some tasks of looking up more data on this organization or household or person and enriching your Salesforce data. And in fact, you could attach several tasks. You could say, anyway, you know, make a phone call to them if it's $100,000 gift, or send a handwritten note if it's a $5,000 gift, or, you know, arrange dinner, you know, with the executive director if it's $1 million gift. Whatever it is you're doing, you can have tasks for that. And in fact, NPSP has ways of automating the attachment of tasks. They're called engagement plans, and they can be attached. All right. So I think we've sort of covered the main fields for an opportunity for what I call simple gifts. Now let's talk about another type of donation or gift. I'm going to call it the major gift. This is money you work for. You targeted it, you planned for it, and you worked hard to obtain it for whatever reason. In the nonprofit world, this is called development, or moves management, or advancement. We seem to not want to call it fundraising anymore. So that's fine. But this type of gift is likely to be created manually far in advance of receiving money. So this is an opportunity or a donation that you're going to create, and it's going to be called, you know, perhaps it's you just identify them. It's like, you know, we know that person, not sure we know how much we know about them. We're call it identified, and then we're going to qualify them, and then we're going to nurture or cultivate them, and then we're going to actually ask for money, and they're going to give, and then we're going to, you know, nurture that some more, and hopefully they're going to give again, and we're going to create a relationship. But the point is, someone is investing months, if not years, in getting to that stage. And just like commercial Salesforce, we can use Salesforce to track all of that by creating opportunities with some other stages. And so you're likely to have a record type for the money that just shows up, and you're going to have a different record type for money that you work for, that you prospect, or that you develop, you know, major gifts. And so I think NPSP calls them by default major gifts. You can rename that anything you want or create others. And there will be multiple stages, like I might have outlined. And each stage will have a probability, and will automatically update the expected value. You know, if you add in $10 million worth of gifts, but they're in the just thinking about them stage, they're probably all worth zero, and so it won't add any future value to your reports. On the other hand, if you've got 10 different gifts in the dinner asking stage, there's a 60-70% likelihood that some of those donations are going to come true, and so they're going to be adding future value to your reports. And so that's kind of what goes on in that moves management or development stage. And typically you'll just be able to handle it with a different record type. In the development, you know, your governance will probably come from the development department, and they're going to want to change the value and the close date and the stage and the probabilities all the time. And they probably will use tasks and activities to track how they're doing. It's unlikely there were tasks and lots of activities attached to the simple donations, but you're going to have a lot of work attached to these major gifts because they take time. And it's someone's job to do that, and Salesforce can help you track how effective you are, and make sure you're not forgetting someone, and that, you know, everything has moved a little bit every quarter, and so on. So that's how that type of thing is handled. You'll hear moves management, and, you know, that's really just fancy words for taking a lead and converting them into an account and a contact and an opportunity, and beginning to follow a business process that allows you to nurture and cultivate and ask that donor for money. All right, so those are two kinds of money. There's a third kind of money that's often involved in a nonprofit, and that's called a grant. And that's an organization to organization giving. Often it's a foundation giving money to you, and typically those foundations make it known that they're interested in giving away some money, and your organization identifies them and goes through a letter of interest, or a letter of intent, perhaps letter of interest, and then applies for the grant, and there are several stages to that depending on the size of the grant, and then they're awarded a letter, and then they receive payment, and perhaps they have to report in order to get the next payment, and so on. And that it sounds complicated, and it is. And it's often someone's job, or multiple people's job to make all that happen. But Salesforce can represent that as a single opportunity. Usually it's a record type, a grant, and you can attach it to the foundation that is going to be providing the grant. And Salesforce has some fields to describe, is it a new grant or is it a grant renewal? Salesforce has some grant some grant steps built in, and a little bit of support to identify the very next step. And I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I don't use it very much, but it's there, because you may not have many of these grants, but they could easily be 40 or 50% of your nonprofit's income, and so they're very important to have visible. It's very important to know that you're doing management on those grants, and all of that activity and deadlines and reporting dates and all that stuff can be captured in Salesforce, and you can report on that. And so that's a big deal, and NPSP supports it, but it's going to look just like an opportunity with some tasks and grant deadline objects hanging off of it. Okay, and then the fourth kind of opportunity you may have may be some type of earned income. Perhaps that this is becoming more and more popular in the world. You have some sort of fee for service income or some sort of product sales for income. And that you can treat just like regular Salesforce. Commercial Salesforce is attached to an account or a household, and it's a sale of a product. You can use products and price books if you want. And that's just going to be a different record type. And you can take orders and fulfill them and so on, all with Salesforce if you so desire. And so that can be a fourth type of opportunity inside of your Salesforce org that represents money. And then there can be a hybrid. We're all familiar with, giving $50 to PBS and receiving a $20 CD. And we can, $20 is considered a product sale and $30 is considered a donation. And you can represent that. And NPSP has some fields for fair market value that can allow you to do that. So that can be a hybrid. And so you might have another record type of opportunity. And believe it or not, there's one more type of opportunity you're likely to need in a nonprofit, and that is an in-kind donation. And that's kind of it's another record type, and there are some fields that NPSP provides that allows you to assign a fair market value to the in-kind donation, and you can separate those record types so that you don't report on them the same way as you do hard cash or grants. So there's a lot to opportunities and tracking it, just like there is in a commercial environment. But we tend to track them that way. You can use products if you sell products. And you could use $0 value opportunities if you wanted to use products to track literature that you mail out or send out or people order. You could do all of that too. So I'm going to leave opportunities alone right now because we've kind of covered the major things, and I'm going to talk about a closely associated object called the payment. And the payment object is a custom object that NPSP provides, and a lot of people don't fully appreciate what they can do with a payment. It probably has its origins for people who make a pledge of, I'll give you $1,000 or $1,200 in the next year by giving you $100 a month. So what we call a multi-payment opportunity. And that's fine. And you can create one opportunity with 12 payments, and Salesforce lets you have a way of marking those off and marking which ones come in. That's fine. But payments are actually useful even when you have one payment for one opportunity. Here's why. I already mentioned that you may have a problem with governance that says, no, we got this money in March 15th, and so that's when we're going to record it. But you may need to know that the donor gave it to you on February 14th. And you may also need to know that you received $96, but the donor sent you $100. And while you could do that in a number of ways inside of Salesforce, I think the payment object gives you an opportunity to do this. The payment object has a value, a date, and a payment method. And you can, as well as notes. And so you can record a whole lot of information there. Typically what I do is I record donor-centric information on my opportunity, and then I record organizational-centric information on the opportunity, on the payment. If I wanted to record that we only got $97, that's probably what I would do, is I would record $97 there. Now, NPSP doesn't really like that. NPSP doesn't love the fact that you have payments not equaling the opportunity amount. That ends up needing you to say you wrote off part of the value, but nevertheless you can. And I do find it very helpful to record how we received the money. In fact, I needed, personally, I find today PayPal and credit card and wire transfer and paper check and ACH and those sorts of things are really needed to help figure out what's going on and figure out how well your development team is engaging in social media and so on. So we record all of that, and the date on which we actually receive them is very important to us because that helps us reconcile to accounting. So this payment object is very important. There's a paid checkbox, there's a date, there's an amount, there's a payment method, and a note, and you can add additional things if you want. That's kind of the basics of a payment. You can see how it works for simple payments. There's one payment for one opportunity. Money that you just received is, and you can record the difference in timing between when the donor wrote the check and when you arrived at deposit it. You can, or when they don't click the button and when it was transferred to you. You can use it for money that you worked pretty hard for that might come in stages, whether that's a grant or a major gift. Maybe once you are awarded a grant, maybe you actually create payments that represent the anticipated payment schedule, and you can mark those off as they happen. And so you can report on that and give your team good visibility on what's going on there. I'm going to say this because I think it's true. Salesforce is not an accounting package. I personally believe it shouldn't be made into an accounting package because people who need to understand it aren't going to. Your CPA and the IRS are not going to understand your Salesforce-based accounting method, and I personally think you're better off with a tool that they are going to understand. That said, you're going to need to reconcile the two, and I've given you the information that I think will allow you to figure out a reconciliation method. Personally, I believe almost all data now flows automatically into every accounting system by online bank transfers and credit card transfers and all that stuff, and needs to also be flowing automatically into Salesforce as much as the time as possible. So what remains is to figure out how to generate sufficient reporting data and reporting structure in both tools so that you can reconcile them with a finite amount of work. We probably receive 100 to 150 transactions per month, and it takes us about an hour and a half or so to reconcile every month. So it's not super cheap process, but it's an important process. All right, so those are the two main objects. There's another object called the GAU. And repeat after me, Salesforce is not an accounting tool. However, donors sometimes specify that their money should be used in certain ways. And so there's this GAU, and it stands for General Accounting Unit. And GAU is an object that you can specify for each of your funds. And again, I'm not saying create an accounting system in Salesforce. That's a bad idea. However, often you need to have a donor-centric representation that this money is for that fund or that scholarship or that type of program, and because you'll want to report on that and communicate to your donor about it. And so that's why you would be using it as, a GAU. So you create these GAUs that represent your fund, and then you create another object that links the opportunity to a GAU and a certain amount. And NPSP provides a reasonable interface for quickly assigning the whole of a donation to some GAUs, one or more GAUs. So that's kind of provided. I confess I don't use it very often. I added a donation field that's called donation purpose to our opportunities and have used that instead of GAUs. But if you want to use more of the standard functionality, that's what you can use. I just started using it before it was fully developed. So there you go. All right. Next is recurring donations. Now, this is a slightly, in my opinion, a controversial subject, but NPSP provides an object to capture somebody's intention to give you a recurring set of donations. Now, please don't confuse this with a donation that has multiple payments. So if they say, I'm going to give you $12,000 in the next 12 months, you have two choices now. And honestly, you're going to have to go to your governance body to decide which choice you should do and why. But one choice would be to say they've made a promise or a commitment or a pledge of $1,200, and that's what we're going to enter in. And we're going to enter in 12 payments of $100 each. And NPSP gives you a nice tool to put those in there every month, and you're finished. And you can mark them off as they come. Or you can treat that as a fixed recurring donation of $100 a month, and you can enter it as a recurring donation object, which is not an opportunity, and say it has a start date and an end date, and it's going to be $100 a month. And NPSP has some magic code that will actually create opportunities, and then you will need to, when the check arrives or the payment arrives, you will need to go find the opportunity and mark it as closed. So a recurring donation is a construct in Salesforce to sort of create repeat donations. There actually is now in Salesforce support for contracted payments or contracted services, so that there's a notion that it's an open end or a closed end repeated by of $15 a month. Recurring donation is the same idea, and it has all the same complexities. I say it's controversial because I think most small nonprofits are probably better off just treating that as money that comes without working too hard for it, and logging as a single payment whenever it comes, because often they don't come exactly on the same date, and they skip a month, and all these things happen, and it's not a contracted commitment. So when they don't show up, it's not likely it's ever going to show up. Somebody just forgets, or they go on vacation, or they're sick in the hospital for a month. It's unlikely you're going to make that up, and so you're going to end up having to remove it anyway. So, but if your governance committee says we need to track those things and know what's going on exactly in this way, then you're going to use the recurring donation object. And there are two ways of using it. It recognizes there are two main styles of recurring donation. The first is a closed commitment. And, this is your classic pledge. I'm pledging $10 a month for the next 12 months. And the other is what we call an open-ended commitment. I'm going to give you $100 a month, and there's no statement about for how long. And so recurring donation has an option to have an open-ended or a closed-ended. And like I said, all it's going to do is NPSP has some code that's going to run in the background every night and say, is it time to make another donation associated with this recurring donation? And if so, I'll make it for you. And what it lets you do, if you're large enough or it's an important enough account, what it lets you do is see, oh, they skipped their donation this month. Maybe we should give them a call and check in with them. In my opinion, that's one of its best uses, is to allow you to realize, oh, they didn't give this month. We should call them. It can be used for tracking cash flows as well. If you have a big development department, it can definitely work that way. Okay, so we've covered a ton here, and I think I'm going to stop. The next subject, part 2 of the money lecture, is about credit or roll-ups. But I'm going to stop because those are kind of the objects that we use to represent donations. We have the opportunity, we have the payment object, which is custom. We can use the GAU object, and we can use the recurring donation. Now, what I want to talk to you about before I finish this, I want to make a pitch for you, particularly if you're small. I think you should not use the recurring donation object. I think instead you should go read mightyforce.org and find the blog article called Automatic Donor Statistics. NPSP has enough information in it to allow you to predict cash flows and to without needing to use the recurring donation object. So I'm able in my organization to look and see which accounts are monthly donors, which accounts are quarterly donors, which accounts are annual donors, and what is their total estimated give based solely on the donation data I already have. So I don't need to ask them for a promise, and I don't need to use a recurring donation. And it's all automatic, just based on enter in opportunities when we get money, and then you'll get enough data eventually to begin to predict, oh, so this person normally gives $100 a month, so they're a $1,200 donor, and they've been doing that for 3.5 years. So I have an ongoing donor income there of $1,200, and if you add up 100 people, I have an ongoing, donor donation of $120,000. So I want to make a pitch that I think that is more efficient than fussing with recurring donations. The problem with recurring donations is, unfortunately, NPSP frequently stops generating them or generates duplicates. And so you're constantly having to clean that up if that happens. And I'm sorry for maligning the code base, but you can review how many questions are asked about that and learn that it's true. And the problem is, once there's a lot of extra donations in your data, you stop trusting it, and that's a big deal. The second thing is, you have to immediately separate checks or donations that come in into 2 piles. Those which we didn't know were coming, and those which we have a recurring donation for. And so it creates this extra need to search, and quite frankly, a lot of times you fail to do that, and so you end up with duplicates again. So you have an open donation that's associated with a recurring donation, and you have a closed donation that you entered in without remembering, oh yeah, that's a recurring donation. And if you have thousands of donors, this is a hard job. So again, it introduces dirty data or suspect data, duplicate data, and the minute you stop trusting your donation data, your system is not valuable anymore for predicting cash flow. And so it seems to me that the main reason recurring donations get added are to know that a person has stopped giving or to predict cash flow. And my automatic donation statistics that you can easily implement with a little customization, all declarative, can do both of those things. I can tell in my database who has skipped a payment or who has stopped giving altogether, and I can tell who has, is a recurring donor and what they're actually worth to us on average based on their past data. So with that, I'm going to close the talk. Please leave comments and ask questions. I would like to know if these talks are useful. As I get feedback, I can revise them and turn them into a little bit more of structured information. But let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.